Second Samuel. We were in the early part of kind of actually more like the middle of chapter 3,
Yep, I got it.
according to my asterisk.
Right above
Verse 17, maybe,
Right
yeah.
above. Sorry,
And
Mary, I just texted you.
we're great.
Okay.
Thank you.
And we are dealing with the kind of ramifications, remember, of Saul's death and the void in leadership, and kind of two factions fighting. And one is David, of course, and the other is Abner, who was kind of Saul's right-hand man, kind of has his own army. And they are in a confrontation now. And so that's where we resume. I'll read from the Common English Bible, and it's Second Samuel. Make sure you're in the right Samuel. And it's chapter 3, and starting at verse 17. Abner then sent word to Israel's elders. "You've wanted David to be your king for some time now," he said. "It's time to act, because the Lord has said about David, 'I will rescue my people Israel from the power of the Philistines and all their enemies through my servant David.'" Abner also spoke directly to the Benjaminites. He then went to inform David in person at Hebron regarding everything that all Israel and the house of Benjamin were willing to do. When Abner, along with 20 others, reached David at Hebron, David threw a celebration for Abner and his men. Then Abner said to David, "Please let me get going so I can assemble all Israel for my master the king. Then they can make a covenant with you, and you will rule over everything your heart desires." At that, David sent Abner off in peace. Right then, David's soldiers and Joab returned from a raid, bringing a great deal of loot with them. Abner was no longer with David in Hebron because David had sent him off in peace. When Joab and all the troops with him returned, Joab was told that Abner, Ner's son, had come to the king and that David had sent him off in peace. Joab went to the king and asked, "What have you done? Abner came to you here. Why did you send him off? Now he's gotten away. Don't you know the evil ways of Abner, Ner's son? He came to trick you, to find out where you come and go, and to learn everything you do." Joab left David and sent messengers after Abner. They brought him back from the well at Sirah, but David didn't know anything of this. When Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside next to the gate to speak with him in private. But instead, Joab stabbed Abner in the stomach, and he died for shedding the blood of Asahel, Joab's brother. When David heard about this later, he said, "I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord concerning the shedding of the blood of Abner, Ner's son. May it fall upon the head of Joab and his entire family tree. May Joab's family never be without someone with a discharge or a skin disease, someone who uses a crutch, someone who dies by the sword, or someone who is hungry." So that is how Joab and his brother Abishai murdered Abner, because he killed their brother Asahel at the battle of Gibeon. Then David ordered Joab and all the troops who were with him, "Tear your clothes and put on funeral clothes, mourn for Abner." King David himself walked behind the body. They buried Abner in Hebron. The king wept loudly at Abner's grave. All the troops cried too. And then the king sang this funeral song for Abner. "Should Abner have died like a fool dies, your hands weren't bound, your feet weren't chained, but you have fallen like someone falls before the wicked." Then the troops cried over Abner again. Then all the soldiers came to urge David to eat something while it was still day. But David swore, May God deal harshly with me, and worse still, if I eat bread or anything else before the sun goes down." All the troops took notice of this and were pleased by it. Indeed, everything that the king did pleased them. So on that day, all the troops and all Israel knew that it wasn't the king's idea to kill Abner, Ner's son. The king told his soldiers, "Don't you know that a prince and a great man in Israel has fallen today? And today, though I am anointed king, I am weak. These men, Zeruiah's sons, are too strong for me. May the Lord repay the one who does evil according to the evil they did." And that is the end of the chapter. And let's say, without any qualification, that last half of verse 39 is one of these problematic Old Testament lines that people still cite today to justify retribution, violence, war. It's one of the things that Jesus directly contradicts when he says, "You've heard an eye for an eye, but I tell you, turn the other cheek." Which just, there you go. Sometimes these books of the Bible, these testaments, are in conversation with each other and a reaction for each other, but it's there. And, you know, a little bit of this kind of palace intrigue again, more of it's retribution again. Joab, you killed him, I'll kill you. You know, this is the times they were living in. And it's you know, it's, we would say today, morally corrupt in some ways. What do you all think?
I think as we go forward, you're going to see that this isn't the only enemy or problem person for David that Joab kills. Some people believe he actually kind of functions as David's hitman. And then David makes the proper comments and aspersions against him and his family, but later you're going to find out it doesn't carry that much weight because he makes Joab the captain of his army. So this is a very complicated relationship here.
So that's a good question that you raised, which is I mean, I'm going to turn into a question, which was, is David sincere at this funeral for Abner? Hard to tell.
Yeah, it's hard to tell David's motives sometimes. David is very much a politician, and we'll see later that he's very willing to make some very hard decisions and blame others, and do some very terrible things in order to advances what he wants. So it's kind of a complex issue, and a lot of this we have to remember, especially in 1st and 2nd Samuel. This is kind of a eulogy to David. It's kind of trying to make him look good, trying to present him in a certain way to give hope to the people who are in exile or approaching exile. And so David, the hero, and this is very much a story that's told to promote him in a positive way.
For those that like a word, little word fun and study about with the Hebrew here. Part of where I'm coming from is this footnote from Robert Alter, who says, starting in verse 21, really verses 21 to 23, David sent Abner off, and he went in peace. The going in peace befits the feast of reconciliation and an agreed on pact. The writer contrives to repeat this sentence verbatim 3 times. You probably picked up on that. It said after Joab had been sent away in peace. It's just like, we got it. But when Joab refers to this very same departure of Abner from Hebron in verse 24, in Hebrew he substitutes in peace, bashalom, with the emphatic infinitive halakha, which means going off. This ominous substitution falls like the clatter of a dagger after the ringing of bells, especially because to go, sometimes that verb occurs in the Bible as a euphemism for dying. So there's a little hint in the Hebrew there that maybe the going off in peace is not it's more of a going off to the slaughter in some way.
This is a big deal in ancient cultures. It has to do with when you have a guest and you treat them with hospitality. This is a big issue in ancient cultures. When David received him and sent him off like that in peace, that more or less should have been a protective, that was kind of like David's word. It's kind of it's behind what happened at Sodom and Gomorrah as well, and why Lot protected the 3 men, the 3 angels that came. This law of hospitality, this custom of hospitality, pretty important. And if David had been guilty of any way being involved in Abner's death after that, really would have been a poor comment on his character.
But he has plausible deniability.
Exactly.
He has Joab do it. And then he does this performative grieving.
Right, right.
Is that what's going on?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's
what I
maybe
think.
what might be going on. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the text is a little ambivalent about it on purpose. Yeah.
It's a very like public mourning.
Yeah.
Right? Changing into sackcloth and the
Well, and that they take
all
time to
that.
explain all that,
Yeah.
he's wailing, he writes a song, as we've established David does. Yeah, which he did for Saul. You're 100% correct. Yeah.
You might look at some contemporary illustrations of this where people kind of fall on their sword for certain political leaders right now. They are willing to take the hit, and this was Joab's role. At least I believe, quite possibly anyway. He was willing to take the hit and remove all the people who were a danger from David, and yet leave David's hands completely clean. In fact, his actions at this made him seem to be more compassionate and more righteous, more upright. So yeah.
Pretty powerful.
It's so contemporary.
And contemporary, yeah, it still happens, right? It just happens in political ways now, Well, it still happens probably
It
in
is.
kingships and regimes and things, absolutely, yeah. Don't have to make too much of a metaphor out of it. When we move into chapter 4 here, which is a short chapter, we're going to get back to a character named Ishbosheth. Remember Saul's son, whose name is probably a euphemism. I want to say it was like son of stupid, but that's not right. Look it back up. Do you remember what we were talking about last week? Son of shame, that's it, yeah. Close enough. Stupid shame, right? Son out of shame. And so he's kind of the king in Israel. Because right now we're divided into Judah and Israel. These are all different tribes, not one big country. So that gives us to chapter 4. Would anyone like to read from different translation? Short enough, you could probably read all 12 verses.
I can if you want.
All right. Thanks, Leslie.
I'm reading out of the NRSV.
Great.
When Saul's son Ishbaal heard that Abner had died at Hebron, his courage failed and all Israel was dismayed. Saul's son had 2 captains of raiding bands. The name of the one was Banah, and the name of the other Rechab. They were sons of Rimmon, a Benjaminite from Beeroth. For Beeroth is considered to belong to Benjamin. Now the people of Beeroth had fled to Gittaim, and there as resident aliens to this day, and are there as resident aliens to this day. Saul's son Jonathan had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, and in her haste fleeing, it happened that he fell and he became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. Now the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, and Rechab and Banah set out, and about the heat of the day they came to the house of Ishbaal, where he was taking his noonday rest. They came inside the house as though to take wheat, and they struck him in the stomach. Then Rechab and his brother Banah escaped. Now they had come into the house where he was lying on his couch in his bedchamber. They attacked him, killed him, and beheaded him. Then they took his head and traveled by way of the Arabah all night long. They brought the head of Ishbaal to David at Hebron and said to the king, "Here's the head of Ishbaal, son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. The Lord has avenged my lord the king this day on Saul and on his offspring." David answered Rechab and his brother Banah, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of every adversity, when the one who told me, 'See, Saul is dead,' thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and killed him at Ziklag. This was the reward I gave him for this news. How much more then when the wicked men have killed a righteous man on his bed in his own house? And now, shall I not require his blood at your hand and destroy you from the earth? So David commanded the young men, and they killed them. They cut off their hands and feet and hung their bodies beside the pool at Hebron. But the head of Ashbel they took and buried in the tomb of Abner at Hebron.
All right.
Wow.
Well, that's the
Getting
end
a
of
little
Ashbel.
ruthless.
Yeah.
All of David's enemies are disappearing,
Yeah.
even though he apparently doesn't want them to. Oh, you're muted, David.
I was going to say that's exactly what I was thinking. Seems to just magically all these enemies or problems for David are being killed and disappearing.
Yes. So true.
Very much against David's public expressions too. Yeah.
Mm.
Why is the little boy in there? Is that just an like
It's
a little?
also Jonathan had a
aside?
boy whose feet were crippled. He was only 5 years old when the news vessel. Yeah, I
That's
mean,
just like a little aside.
it really is. Oh,
Does
here's a
he
foot.
come-
Oh,
I think he comes become important
Oh.
later on,
oh okay.
Mm.
but I'm
Mhm.
not sure. I don't remember. It's been a while since I read Samuel.
This is in the Common English Bible, a footnote. In the middle of the story of Ishbosheth's death, we find a small note about a son of Jonathan. His name was Mephibosheth, although his name is reported as Meribal in 1 Chronicles chapter 8 and 9. This is probably another instance where the historian, offended by the element of Baal's name in an Israelite name, remember Ishbosheth's name, that's the name of shame, as he was
Fall.
named after Baal, the other god. So, embarrassed by that, the historian substituted the word for shame. The brief note here prepares us for a later encounter, as Leslie was saying, between David and Mephibosheth. The note informs us that as a 5-year-old child, Mephibosheth fell and was permanently injured. Okay. So I guess it's going to come up in chapter 9. And I guess as the editors were putting this together, or as they call it a historian here, which is a little generous, as they're kind of making this book or this scroll, they kind of felt like we have to have some kind of backstory for this son of Jonathan. It's just a little something they had kept their eye off the ball about, so they inserted this in. And that happens in the Old Testament a lot, and the New Testament. I just want to flag for you too, just this is, it's not always true in the Old Testament, but I think in this book, it's always mindful too of remember who Yahweh is favoring here, and where, and a lot of times leading up to this point, David has been in prayer with God, and yet as these things are happening, God is not there. And I'm starting to think that that's kind of important, that God's missing. And when God is mentioned, it's almost in an epithet, which is saying, at the end of chapter 3, may the Lord repay the one who does evil according to the evil they did. Or here in verse 8, today the Lord has avenged our master, the king, on Saul and his descendants. And then they promptly end up getting killed as well. So I just flag that as going, some of these folks who are invoking God's name may not exactly know the God they're worshiping.
Yep.
Feels like they're gonna run out of people.
Boy, that's one way to end a war, right? Wow. Okay, now then, chapter 5. We're going to get some stability here, and I think move out of a little bit of these political executions. Anyone want to read a different translation from 5? As far as we can go. There's some big names in it, though. Should I do this?
You want the message?
Yeah, I'll do the message. Or you got it?
I can do it.
Oh, great. Yeah. With the big names, just do it.
Just
Do
for
it.
something
Do what you
different.
feel. Right.
Yeah.
So go. I would go to. So you can go to verse 14.
Let's
If
see,
it-
it's
I know
just
the
a little
numbers are
bit
weird,
different,
yeah.
I'll
There's like a list of names
Yeah, I think
there.
it'll
Yeah,
be 17 by my version, but
Okay.
we'll see how we do.
great.
Before long, all the tribes of Israel approached David in Hebron and said, "Look at us, your own flesh and blood. In times past, when Saul was our king, you were the one who really ran the country. Even then, God said to you, 'You will shepherd my people Israel, and you'll be the prince.'" All the leaders of Israel met with King David at Hebron, and the king made a treaty with them in the presence of God. And so they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king and ruled for 40 years. In Hebron, he ruled Judah for 7.5 years. In Jerusalem, he ruled all Israel and Judah for 33 years. David and his men immediately set out for Jerusalem to take on the Jebusites who lived in that country. But they said, "You might as well go home. Even the blind and the lame could keep you out. You can't get in here." They had convinced themselves that David couldn't break through. But David went right ahead and captured the fortress of Zion, known ever since as the City of David. That day David said, "To get the best of these Jebusites, one must target the water system, not to mention this so-called lame and blind bunch that David hates." In fact, he was so sick and tired of it, people coined the expression, "No lame and blind allowed in the palace." David made the fortress city his home and named it City of David. He developed the city from the outside terraces inward. David proceeded with a longer stride, a larger embrace, since the God of the angel armies was with him. It was at this time that Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messages to David along with timbers of cedar. He also sent carpenters and masons to build a house for David. David took this as a sign that God had confirmed him as king of Israel, giving his kingship world prominence for the sake of Israel, his people. David took on more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he left Hebron, and more sons and daughters were born to him. The names of those born to him in Jerusalem are Shammah, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elisha, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eladia, and Eliphalet.
Perfect.
Mm.
All right, I'm gonna be pulling up a map on screen because we gotta talk geography for a second here. But until then, what do you all think?
He already had 6 sons, right?
Yeah,
And so now he's got more.
It's
All
it's
right.
interesting. It's interesting how the tribes in Israel, all of a sudden they changed their tune. Instead of supporting Ishbaal or Saul, all of a sudden they're great supporters of David, talking about, about how he was really in charge all the time, that Saul was supposedly king. It's
It's kind of like,
interesting when you look at that political speech. Yeah, go ahead, Charity. I'm sorry.
no, I was just thinking about all the Russian oligarchs who fall out
Yes.
of like off of balconies lately.
Yes.
And so if enough oligarchs fall off of balconies, the rest of them
go,
seem to be
Putin's
pretty
our man,
evil.
right? And it reminds me a little bit of the way people fall away from Jesus later, and what do they say? The people say in the gospel, one of the gospels, I think it's John, we have no king but Caesar. Just as quickly as fortunes change on somebody, even God's chosen, whether it's good or bad, just people will maneuver the way people maneuver on where they think the tides are changing. I want to show you this map real quick because this is I was trying to find one of just these kingdoms of Judah and Israel. Remember I said we're talking about something about the size of New Jersey, roughly the shape too, but imagine them just divided here. So you see all these other kingdoms around, other kingdoms that get mentioned a lot. Moab, where Ruth is from, is the Moabites. This is modern day Jordan. And this body of water here is the Jordan River, and I forget what, that's just more of the Jordan River, and I forget what this body is. Oh, the Dead Sea, I'm sorry. Up here is the Sea of Galilee, by way of showing you. But Jerusalem is at this time, I was looking at a footnote. Jerusalem is a Jerubite. It's not Israelite. It's not. It's got a kingdom of Judah, and yet David marches in and basically kind of pronounces it. Now this is going to be the capital of my new kingdom, and you can see geographically why, because Jerusalem is kind of situated almost on the border between all of these places. And I just want to name that for you to say, you know, this is inherently in the name of a city that means the city of peace. There is inherently a fraction that is to some degrees still at play today with Israel and Palestinians. It's just and now you've got, of course, a city that's a modern city grown around a fortress old city, which itself is divided now into four parts, where Christians have claim on one corner of it. You know, this is just part of the DNA of Jerusalem. It's always fated to be a city in some kind of degree of turmoil, even if it's kind of a cold turmoil, you know, not a war fighting turmoil. But I thought seeing the geography might help you understand a little bit too.
So when David was hiding from Saul,
Mm-hmm.
he was with the Ammonites. Am I remembering that right? So he was up
Oh,
there
yeah, good memory. So he would have been way out here on the,
when he was like living as a mercenary.
yeah.
I think.
And this is, you know, when we talk about the wilderness, we're talking about this kind of area too, because it's very desert, hilly, this whole area, roughly. So yeah, he could have been out in those. Anyway,
It's helpful to see.
yeah,
It's so
I
small.
think,
so small.
yeah, I think it's interesting too that David modestly names the city after himself, the city of David, and he proceeds to start taking more concubines and wives, which is the way that kings formed alliances at the time with rival nations. They allied themselves by becoming members of the family. They took the wives and concubines from rulers of those around them. So, yeah.
Yeah. He did, well, we'll give him credit where credit's due. He did stop short of calling the city, you know, David Town, or, you know, Davidville. So not quite there, but yeah,
Yep,
I know,
the
I'm just
city of
teasing.
David.
Yeah, City of David is pretty bold. Yeah. David, you know, the key line in all of this probably is 10, which in my translation is David grew increasingly powerful, and the Lord of heavenly forces was with him.
Why is he so upset about there being lame and blind people?
That's a good question. David, that is why people on that day, whoever texted me, strike the windpipe, because well, you know, earlier, what was it? Was it David?
Well,
Yeah,
it was,
David
it
kind of
has to do
curses
with
them earlier.
they had said the people that own the city, they felt their fortress is solid, and they said even lame and blind people could keep you out. There's no way you're going to conquer us. And so when he conquered them, and he used the standard siege tactic, which was to deprive them of water, and when he conquered them, then the people use this as an excuse to say that David won't even allow lame and blind people in his presence now. So it was kind of a slap back at them.
It's great. Well done.
Offends modern sensibilities, though.
Yeah. All of these, there's so many little throwaway lines like, after this, David married more secondary wives, and Jerusalem fathered more sons and daughters. Yeah. They just try to cover off the family tree a little bit here. This is from the editors of the Common English Bible, and a little blurb in here. After Saul's death, it is clear that a division still exists between north and south. David is immediately proclaimed king in Judah and makes his capital in Hebron. But it's only years later, and after some actual conflict, that the elders of the northern tribes of Israel make him king. They have few alternatives, as we've established. People keep dying. David simultaneously now rules over two kingdoms, Israel and Judah. By force of his leadership, he will hold Israel and Judah together in a growing Davidic empire. that will also include some of the neighboring non-Israelite territories. His son, Solomon, will inherit the unified Israelite kingdom, but his son won't be able to hold it together, and the kingdom will divide forever into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. The seeds for this division are already present in the separate kingships given to David. I should have been one of the editors. I didn't even read that. Just kidding. But yes, I mean, that's just the story of Jerusalem. It really is the story of the Holy Land.
I find it interesting with the city of Hebron, because there's Hebron, Illinois, that I know from my husband being from that area. There's a Hebron, Indiana. There's a Hebron High School. Now I know probably the source of the name.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's obviously a derivative of Hebrew. So it's kind of, you know, like it's like city of the people. Authentically, the people, you know, the people maybe with some more, maybe not original claim, but some authentic claim. And I think I was saying last week, Hebron is a special place today. It's in Palestinian land, or as we probably should say, Israeli occupied Palestinian land. So it's a kind of place where when you're physically there, you have to leave Israel and go through a checkpoint, armed checkpoint, and get cleared through, which is why it's good to go in tour buses as with pilgrimages, because they're familiar with those. You know, that's not suspicious to them. But that's where you have to go to get to Bethlehem. That's in Palestinian land, and that's where you have to go to get into Hebron. And in Hebron are the supposed resting places of Abraham and Isaac and Rebecca and Sarah, all of those matriarchs and patriarchs, and in one big giant temple in the middle of the town. Yeah. So yeah, I think those names, like in Illinois, are paying homage to it, and it's considered a sacred place. Yeah. Not many Jerusalems in America, are there? Now that I think about it. Something to ponder. Or I guess there's Bethlehem, but like in Pennsylvania. Yeah. But I wonder if the people just go, well, I don't know if I want to touch that. Jerusalem just feels a little bit like naming a town Mecca. It's like that's a little loaded.
David, but not very many Jesuses.
That's
right.
It's right. Exactly right. All right, then we are on we're back on verse 17 to the end of the chapter. Do you want to keep going with the
message?
Yeah, finish with the message.
When the Philistines got word that David had been made king over all Israel, they came on the hunt for him. David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. When the Philistines arrived, they deployed their forces in Rephaim Valley. Then David prayed to God, "Shall I go up and fight the Philistines? Will you help me beat them?" "Go up," God replied. "Count on me. I'll help you beat them." Then David went straight to Baal Perazim and smashed them to pieces. Afterwards, David said, "God exploded on my enemies like a gush of water." That's why David named the place Baal Perazim, the master who explodes. The retreating Philistines dumped their idols, and David and his soldiers took them away. Later, there was a repeat performance. The Philistines came up again and deployed their troops in the Rephaim Valley. David again prayed to God. This time God said, "Don't attack them head on. Instead, circle around behind them and ambush them from the grove of sacred trees. When you hear the sound of shuffling in the trees, get ready to move out. It's a signal that God is going ahead of you to smash the Philistine camp." David did exactly what God told him. He routed the Philistines all the way from Gibeon to Gezer.
Well, okay, it's the things that I missed when I wasn't here, but how come God is back in the picture now at this point?
Yeah.
I think that's a great, almost rhetorical question. Yeah. Well, David prays, so that's the key. And probably the parts you might have missed, Mary, is that whenever David was being chased by Saul in 1 Samuel, or anytime David needed help, he would stop and pray to God. And we noted maybe not last week, but maybe the week before, I can't remember, that God is anthropomorphic in this account, which means God has human features like communication, like there's clearly a red phone to God in David's castle.
Yeah.
And God does not speak in a cloud of smoke or just to prophets anymore. He goes straight to David, and David, but it's when David asks for God's help that God says, I'll help. I think my hunch is that that's the thing to hang your hat on, not the fact that, as many people do to suit their own, ends or goals, that God is going, well, I'll happily, fight a war for you, or I'll clearly engage in battle. Because again, it's loaded. You have to, pun intended, you have to really ask, what is this? And this is what am I trying to say? Be careful when anything in scripture says the Lord says, because it's really the writer of 2 Samuel says that the Lord says, or tradition says that the Lord says. It's just, I just want to say, just tread carefully when it's storytelling and not necessarily prophecy. Yes, it's like probably a better way to explain that.
I think it's unusual because God refers to God in the third person.
Yes, does that a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It
I am the
doesn't say
Lord your God. Yeah,
I'll go out before you.
right.
I just thought it was interesting that they chose to do it that way.
David, you're muted.
It's the royal use of the term God referring to, yeah,
Could be, yeah.
kind of like some other political leaders do that refer to themselves by their names instead
Yes.
of me or I. It's yeah, we have a person who was president that used to do that
Yep.
quite frequently.
Yeah. And
It's,
oh, go ahead.
there's an interesting note, and I don't remember if it was Holy Imagination or my Hebrew Bible study book, that the adoration that's shown to David is very similar to what was shown to John Kennedy in America.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's that kind of a hero.
Yeah, war hero, ruddy, good looking, right?
Yeah, with a
nice.
wandering eye.
Yeah.
But yeah, flawed. It's a great comparison. I was trying to think of somebody more modern, but that's actually not a bad comparison at all. And of course, how Israel thinks of him in retrospect, where the edges get softened a lot,
Yeah.
It's a really great comparison.
Yep.
Wow. I'm wondering if we should kind of start it in a half of a chapter. Well, we can do this. I think I'm going to read 6, if that's all right, and I'll read from the Common English Bible. Got a lot of big names, so wish me luck.
Good luck.
Once again, David assembled the select warriors of Israel, 30,000 strong. David and all the troops who were with him set out for Bala, which is the Kiriath Jearim of Judah, to bring God's chest up from there, the chest that is called by the name of the Lord of heavenly forces, who sits enthroned on the winged creatures. So quick, Greg's note, we're talking about the Ark of the Covenant. Last time the Ark was around, remember, that was when the Israelites were using it to help them in battle, and it didn't work. Verse 3, they loaded God's chest on a new cart and carried it from Abinadab's house, which was on a hill. Uzzah and Ahio, Abinadab's sons, were driving the new cart. Uzzah was beside God's chest, while Ahio was walking in front of it. Meanwhile, David and the entire house of Israel celebrated in the Lord's presence with all their strength, with songs and zithers and harps and tambourines and rattles and cymbals. When they approached Nacon's threshing floor, Uzzah reached out to God's chest and grabbed it because the oxen had stumbled. The Lord became angry at Uzzah, and God struck him there because of his mistake. And he died there next to God's chest. Then David got angry because the Lord's anger lashed out against Uzzah, and so that place is called Perez Uzzah today. David was frightened by the Lord that day. How will I ever bring the Lord's chest to me? He asked. So David didn't take the chest away with him to David's city. Instead, he had it put in the house of Obed-Edom, who was from Gath. The Lord's chest stayed with Obed-Edom, his household in Gath for 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom's house and all that he had done. And all that he had, I'm sorry. King David was told, the Lord has blessed Obed-Edom's family and everything he has because of God's chest being there. So David went and brought God's chest up from Obed-Edom's house to David's city with celebration. Whenever those bearing the chest advanced 6 steps, David sacrificed an ox and a fatling calf. David, dressed in a linen priestly vest, you might have the word ephod in yours, danced with all his strength before the Lord. This is how David and the entire house of Israel brought up the Lord's chest with shouts and trumpet blasts. As the Lord's chest entered David's city, Saul's daughter Michal was watching from a window. She saw King David jumping and dancing before the Lord, and she lost all respect for him. The Lord's chest was brought in and put in its place beside the tent that David had pitched for it. And then David offered entirely burned offerings in the Lord's presence in addition to well-being sacrifices. When David finished offering the entirely burned offerings and the well-being sacrifices, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of heavenly forces. He distributed food among all the people of Israel to the whole crowd, male and female, each receiving a loaf of bread, a date cake, and a raisin cake. Then all the people went back to their homes. David went home to bless his household, but Saul's daughter Michal came out to meet him. How did Israel's king honor himself today, she said, by exposing himself in plain view of the female servants of his subjects like any indecent person would? David replied to Michal, I was celebrating before the Lord, who chose me over your father and his entire family, and who appointed me leader over the Lord's people, over Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord again. I may humiliate myself even more, and I may be humbled in my own eyes, but I will be honored by the female servants you were talking about. Michal, Saul's daughter, had no children to the day she died.
He certainly distributed a lot of carbohydrates.
He sure did. He sure did. It's another great, this is a kind of a infamous chapter, but what a great story of he can do some great things and then he can turn around and kind of curse someone in the same hour. It's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or maybe 2 steps back. This whole sequence of him dancing with the Ark of the Covenant is a really big deal. And next week I'm going to bring a clip from a movie that does a really good depiction of it too. So
Was he blaming Uzzah because the oxen stumbled?
yeah, looks like it. Or because he was because he touched it, right? You're not supposed to touch it. This kind of gets
Yeah.
to that kind of Spielbergy,
Mm-hmm.
notion of the face melting of the ark, that it's so powerful you can't touch it or look at it and look inside it at least.
This had happened before when earlier when the ark was being carried, and they had stumbled, and 2 of the servants reached out to steady it. They didn't touch the ark itself. That had rings, and they put staves through it, and they carried it that way. It was so holy that it wasn't supposed to be touched. But I'm not. Yeah, it does raise some questions. Yeah,
which is exactly how they depicted in Raiders of the Lost Ark. They never touch it. They put Indy and his friend put 2 giant wooden poles through it to carry it. Yeah. But it's another that verse 6 to 8 is another one of those retrofitting a story in about why a place is called that place. But there was no else for them to tell that story except here, because you can then ask the question, why would someone touch the ark? Well, they were moving it, and the ox fell, and he reached over to steady it. He meant well, but so it's like, why would you name a town or a village after something as horrific or maybe even embarrassing? And it's like, well, he didn't mean to do it.
just as an interesting note, you can kind of understand what Michal's problem was if you really know what an ephod looks like. He was wearing just an ephod, and
Yep.
that's basically an apron-like thing. So he was pretty exposed when he
You left
was
nothing to the
joyously-
imagination.
No, he was joyously dancing. If understanding that David's wife wasn't too pleased is not hard to understand at all.
He's mortified. Yeah,
Yeah.
the ephod looks a little bit like the chasuble that we wear on Sundays, or clergy wear, the more colored fabric over it. So imagine if I came dancing into the church just like that. That's a Title IV charge right there, I think. Yeah, and imagine it's and I'm dancing and it's breezy. You know, it's just not going to go so well. It's like,
The
Thank you
message,
so much for the visual.
you're welcome. You're welcome.
the message instead of the, says that her heart was filled with scorn after seeing him dance.
Yeah, she's angry, and then it just by him, you know, the commentary from the writer is pretty cold right there, but just from him saying, I'll do it again, you know, I'd humiliate myself all over for the Lord, you know. It's basically saying, like, I think it's trying to lift him up in, like, this kind of religious fervor is pleasing in God's eyes, because the result is she becomes unable to have children, or they, you know, they cease to have any relations from that point on. Either way.
Is she the
Yeah,
one
yeah.
who got
Bad
passed
fortune.
back and forth? Because didn't
Yes.
she get taken away from David?
Exactly, yeah.
And then
Saul
came
had
back again.
Saul moved her up someone else.
She might already be grumpy.
She's a bit over it.
I mean,
Yeah.
Well,
she's been
It's
through
not
a
a
Yeah.
fun life for her. Yeah.
Yeah, and she was the king's daughter, and David had all these other wives and concubines, which is bad enough, but then he gets involved in this display where everyone in the whole nation could exactly see what David was made of. And
Right.
yeah,
Exactly.
And her other poor husband's still weeping.
Yeah.
behind her.
Remember that husband she left behind that's crying somewhere?
He
Yeah.
probably kept
Poor
his soul
guy.
warm,
He did. Yeah.
But
It's great. It's a really dynamic scene, and a refreshing break from all the killing for sure. But it's also another great sequence that just kind of raises as many questions as it does give you any kind of clear pathway through. But it's also kind of a defiant moment for David. This is how he attributes his victories to the Lord, Yahweh, the God of Israel. And here he is bringing in, it's like returning this holy relic to the city he believes it belongs in, his city, so it's kind of again, another sign of kind of this kind of destiny that's going to always pervade that land, which is that, who has the thing or the church or the temple or the location or the whatnot is going to be the one that has the best claim to the authority of it, which is which is always in dispute. Yeah. Woohoo. Thank you, everyone. We
I'm
got through
glad
a
I'm
lot.
back in the story. It's really quite a story.
Yeah, it's easy to get back in. It's definitely a narrative. It's for sure. It's a this happened and then this happened and then this happened, which is pretty great. Entertaining, at least. Yeah.
yeah, dynamic.
Right. All right, everyone. Take care. Stay
All
warm
right.
or enjoy the scenes outside your window.
Okay,
And we'll pick it up next week.
okay.
Take care.
Bye.
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 Bye.